The cost of keeping monsters alive in a fractured and unforgiving system. You do not heal the sick. You repair broken machines so they can function again. The red toll never stops flowing. It simply changes containers in the dark. Precision is a curse. Every repaired structural failure brings another disaster closer to reality. They bring the shattered remnants. You rebuild the nightmares to exact their silent tolls. The perimeter is sealed tight. The suffocating reality of the underground bunker traps everyone inside. 99% eventually initiate the self-destruct protocol. The mental weight crushes the internal logic. The boundary between sanctuary and slaughterhouse is just a heavy sheet of rusted metal. Another asset severely compromised. The structural damage requires immediate, brutal, and mechanical intervention. There is no anesthetic in the shadows, only raw friction and necessary calculated agony. Empathy is a lethal vulnerability. You cut it out before it compromises the mission. The nerves scream against the intrusion. You ignore the static and focus on extraction. They demand immediate results. The broken assets must be patched up for the next deployment. The heat is suffocating. The air tastes of iron rust and ancient unspoken sins. They supervise the restoration. The investment must yield returns before it is finally silenced. The body fights the intrusion. A futile rebellion against the cold, necessary mechanics of survival. You bind the ruins together, creating a temporary patch for an inevitably fatal flaw. The system stabilizes. The physical shell is sealed, but the internal corruption remains untouched. Another shift survived, but the mental decay accelerates with every successful mechanical intervention completed. The restraints are loosened, only to be tightened again when the next shadow falls. The physical remnants wash away. The psychological stains are permanently bonded to the core. Reinforcements arrive, but they bring heavier artillery and the promise of more shattered systems. The schedule accelerates. The underground economy demands an endless supply of operational assets. The paperwork of the damned. Every signature authorizes another inevitable structural failure. The reboot sequence is violent. The machine wakes up, ready to dispense chaos again. You hold down the nightmare, ensuring the mechanical repairs hold under maximum stress. They wait patiently for the repairs, eager to return the neutralized assets to the field. The perimeter is locked down. There is absolutely no escape from the underground reality. A digital tether to a normal life. The contrast physically tears at the internal logic. The silence is deafening. The separation from reality becomes an unbearable, permanent weight. The signal punches through the concrete, a brief glimpse of the world left behind. A smile from another universe. It feels like a blade twisting into the core. You fabricate the safety. You lie to protect them from the crimson reality. The shadows demand your full attention. Personal tethers are an unacceptable operational hazard. The connection is severed. The descent back into the mechanical nightmare resumes immediately. The tools of the trade. Designed for blunt force trauma and unholy reconstruction, the cycle resets violently. Another broken machine dragged from the streets for emergency calibration. You embrace the horror. The only way to survive is to become part of the machine. They measure success in heartbeats. The moral decay is completely irrelevant to the bottom line. You remove the foreign objects, but the darkness embedded within them stays forever. The pressure must be absolute. You seal the structural leaks before the system completely flatlines. They guard the perimeter like wolves, ensuring the illicit operations remain completely isolated from reality. The biological waste accumulates fast, a physical manifestation of the endless underground cycle of destruction. The structural strain is immense. The physical shell rebels against the harsh mechanical intervention required. You sew the nightmare shut, locking the unspeakable horrors deep beneath the repaired artificial layers. The timeline is unforgiving. Every wasted second risks a catastrophic failure for the entire syndicate. The sterilization process is brutal. Purging the contamination requires an overwhelming application of chemical friction. The quarantine zone is absolute. No one leaves until the mechanical assets are fully restored. The tactile sensation is nauseating. The physical reality of the underground trade coats your hands. The artificial sun reveals everything, exposing the darkest mechanical repairs hidden beneath the city streets. Another hostile element, successfully extracted. The machine is one step closer to violent operational readiness. They prepare for the inevitable fallout. Every successful repair guarantees another highly destructive kinetic exchange. The compensation is purely physical. It cannot buy back the fragments of a shattered conscience. You secure the crumbling foundation, hoping the patched system holds together long enough to escape. The system regains operational awareness. The engineered nightmare is fully prepared to strike once more. The heavy metallic catalyst of destruction. It travels through the dark, dismantling whatever it touches. The physical barrier is removed, but the heavy psychological contamination has already penetrated the core. The inspection is strictly mechanical. If the joints hold, the asset is immediately deployed again. You seek the freezing isolation. Attempting to drown the echoing screams trapped in your memory. The digital tether calls again, a sharp reminder of the normal life you systematically destroyed. You medicate the operator, not the patient. The system must remain numb to function optimally. Paranoia is a permanent resident. Every distant sound is a potential catastrophic end to operations. Chemical suppression is the only reliable defense against the crushing weight of the underground reality. The armor always fails. The organic machinery underneath bears the full brunt of the impact. The directors dictate the priority. You simply execute the mechanical extraction without a single hesitation. The physical vessel endures the absolute extreme. Pain is just another unrecorded data point here. They reload while you rebuild. The violent cycle is a perfectly synchronized, highly destructive engine. The primary objective is achieved. The foreign contaminant is isolated and removed from the equation. The logistical network updates instantly. Another restored unit is immediately marked as ready for deployment. The lead is removed, but the invisible damage it left behind is utterly permanent. You aggressively seal the leak, hoping the fragile patch survives the next violent kinetic exchange. The chaotic internal storm subsides, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell running on pure aggressive instinct. The armor is discarded, but the heavy suffocating weight on the chest remains completely unchanged. The queue is infinite. The brutal assembly line of shattered forms never ceases its operation. The mental fatigue is absolute. The internal logic systems are dangerously close to critical failure. The uniform absorbs the horror, wearing the visceral evidence of a broken and condemned reality. There is no room for hesitation. The overseers demand constant, uninterrupted mechanical reconstruction without fail. They secure the immediate zone, ensuring the dark surgical theater remains completely isolated from daylight. The machine resets itself, ready to dive back into the shattered remnants of violent conflicts. The next nightmare begins. The cycle of underground mechanical repair demands immediate and absolute focus. You dig through the wreckage, searching for the lethal fragment that threatens the internal systems. Time is a luxury you cannot afford. Every passing second diminishes the operational return on investment. The instruments of salvage. They pry apart the torn structures to isolate the immediate threat. The physical shell rebels aggressively. The nervous system screams in an endless loop of static agony. You manually pinch the fuel lines, ensuring the biological engine does not completely drain out. They constantly monitor the void. The shadows outside are just as lethal as the ones inside. The outside world attempts a breach, a digital ghost trying to penetrate a sealed tomb. You ignore the tether. Acknowledging the connection only amplifies the suffocating weight of this underground reality. The Sentinels feel absolutely nothing. Their empathy was surgically removed long before they took the post. You administer the chemical spark, forcing the dormant internal systems to violently restart their primary functions. The system violently snaps back online. The artificial resurrection is terrifying, mechanical, and entirely unholy. The artificial adrenaline. It forces the broken machinery to temporarily ignore its catastrophic structural failures. The physical exhaustion demands compliance. The heavy toll of the underground heavily fractures your mental foundation. The digital compensation is delivered. Another untraceable deposit for a soul that is already completely bankrupt. The wealth accumulates in the dark, but it cannot purchase a single shred of genuine redemption. The repaired machine is repositioned, sent directly back into the grinder to face inevitable structural collapse. The isolation returns aggressively. The silence in the void is louder than the mechanical screams. The physical evidence is aggressively purged, but the psychological stain is permanently welded to the core. You scrub until the layers peel, but the invisible contamination penetrates much deeper than the skin. The heavy gears shift again. The underground meat grinder demands another mechanical sacrifice to keep turning. The assembly line resets. You prepare the sterile instruments for another wave of unholy mechanical reconstruction. The delivery is brutal and continuous. The underground economy heavily relies on your silent, rapid interventions. The biological waste overflows the containers, a stark visual representation of the escalating underground kinetic conflicts. You violently strip away the ruined armor, exposing the fragile, shattered framework hidden beneath the synthetic layers. They demand miracles from the dark. Every delayed repair is considered a direct threat to the syndicate. The raw friction triggers a violent physical rebellion. The system aggressively fights the necessary mechanical intrusion. The suffocating heat slowly melts your resolve. The internal foundation inches closer to an absolute catastrophic collapse. The steel cage is completely sealed tight, leaving you trapped alone with the screaming, broken machinery. The digital anchor is heavy. Staring at the fragile connection only amplifies the suffocating isolation of the bunker. The signal is heavily degraded by the concrete. The normal reality is slowly fading into permanent static. You manually sever the final tether. The dangerous illusion of a normal life is permanently deleted. The paranoia is a highly contagious infection. The shadows constantly whisper of an impending tactical breach. The mechanical reconstruction is incredibly brutal. You forcibly stitch the nightmare back into a functional, lethal shape. The violent kinetic storm passes. The repaired asset enters a dormant state, awaiting the next violent deployment. The overseers are momentarily satisfied. The brutal quota is met, ensuring your survival for another brief cycle. Drawn to the blinding artificial sun, they blindly smash into the burning glass until their systems completely fail. The washing ritual is completely obsessive, desperately trying to chemically purge the invisible corruption from the core. You stare into the shattered reflection. The monster looking back is the true product of this underground factory. The heavy gates open once more. The temporary silence is immediately violently shattered by new arriving casualties. The psychological fracture is temporarily sealed. The endless mechanical loop demands your immediate, absolute return to the table. The surface is reset, erasing the physical memory of the previous nightmare to make room for the next. The delivery never stops. The underground network constantly bleeds, demanding your immediate mechanical intervention to survive. Chemical purity violently clashes with biological reality. The stains are merely pushed around, never truly erased. The overseers pinpoint the priority. The critical structural failures must be aggressively sealed before total system collapse. You aggressively widen the breach. The only way to extract the lethal contaminant is to plunge deeper. The physical shell desperately fights the unmedicated intrusion. The internal alarms are screaming in pure, raw static. The external perimeter tightens aggressively. The violent shadows outside are actively hunting the broken machinery inside. You isolate the core issue, a heavy piece of accelerated metal designed to cause absolute structural failure. The lethal payload is discarded, joining the massive pile of violent currency that fuels the underground engine. You plug the massive leak with raw friction, applying extreme mechanical pressure to force the system online. The telemetry confirms temporary stability. The broken investment is successfully protected from immediate and total operational failure. The structural integrity is brutally reinforced. You permanently weave the nightmare directly into the repaired organic framework. The violent instruments are constantly sharpened. They anticipate the immediate return of the newly restored mechanical asset. The violent reboot sequence completes. The fractured mind immediately searches for new targets in the dark void. The immediate objective is complete, but the crushing internal fatigue aggressively threatens your own structural integrity. The chaotic aftermath of the intervention. The instruments of salvage always bear the heaviest physical toll. The asset is violently reclaimed, ripped straight from the repair table, and thrown immediately back into action. The freezing water numbs the flesh, but the psychological temperature continues to violently boil beneath the surface. The escort secures the exit. The repaired machine is guided back into the violent labyrinth of shadows. The brief isolation is terrifying. You are left alone with the deafening echoes of your own mechanical sins. You wash the physical remnants away, but the internal corruption stubbornly clings to your core. The guards secure the physical tomb, trapping the corrupted machinery securely inside the silent dark. The flow is endless, but no amount of aggressive chemical purity can erase the horror. The last connection is violently destroyed. The descent into the mechanical nightmare is now absolute. The financial harvest is violently collected. The heavy price of shattered souls and broken armor. They anticipate the immediate retaliation. The violent cycle guarantees an aggressive return of kinetic force. The quiet moments are the deadliest. The suppressed screams violently echo within the empty structure. You reset the lethal instruments. The mechanical loop demands immediate compliance, despite the internal collapse. The sentinels feel absolutely no fatigue. They are perfectly calibrated components of the underground machine. The table absorbs the violent history. Every deep scratch represents another shattered biological system repaired. The internal logic finally fractures violently. The psychological weight of the dark fully crushes you. The overseers simply walk away, leaving you permanently buried under the massive, suffocating physical toll. The 99% statistic echoes loudly. The self-destruct protocol becomes an increasingly highly logical conclusion. The temporary silence is violently broken. The underground engine rapidly spins up for another cycle. You stand back up violently. The machine cannot rest while the external conflicts fiercely burn. The violent beacon activates aggressively, signaling the immediate incoming arrival of massive catastrophic structural failures. The perimeter is aggressively breached. The external nightmare violently floods back into the sterile zone. The incoming casualties are absolutely massive. The system prepares for an unprecedented wave of destruction. You armor up once again, embracing the violent, mechanical descent into the absolute darkest depths. Subscribe now to descend further, or remain completely oblivious to the violent mechanics of survival.